ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरं तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। Shivom friends. So today we'll be reading chapter 45th of third book on creation, that is Utpatti Khanda, and the story of Leela and Ma Saraswati is continuing. In this chapter, it is being discussed that in this chapter it is being discussed that second Leela gets the boon from Ma Saraswati, but not the first one. So the heading of this chapter is like how we seek is how we obtain. Let us continue this. Ma Saraswati continued, "Know, Leela, that this Viduratha, your husband, will lose his life in this battlefield, and his soul will return to the tomb in the inner apartment where it will resume its former state." Vasishtha said, upon hearing these words of the goddess, second Leela, who was standing by, bent herself lowly before the goddess and addressed her with folded palms. The second Leela said, "Goddess, the genius of intelligence is ever adored by me, and she gives me her visits in my nightly dreams. I find you here exactly of her likeness. Therefore give me your blessing. O goddess with the beautiful face." Vasishtha said. The goddess, being addressed by the lady in this way, remembered her faith and reliance in her, then politely spoke to the lady, standing as a suppliant before her. The goddess said, "I am pleased, my child, with your unfailing and undiminished adoration of me all your lifetime. Now say what you want of me." The second Leela said, "Ordain, O goddess, that with this body of mine I may accompany my husband to whatever place he is destined to go after his death in the world." The goddess replied, "Be it so, my child. Who has worshipped me with flowers, incense, and offerings, with all diligence and without fail?" But she said, the second Leela was cheered by this blessing of the goddess. The first Leela was much puzzled in her mind at the difference between their states. The first Leela said, "Those who desire truth and they whose desires lean towards godliness have all their wishes fulfilled without delay and fail. Then tell me, goddess, why could I not keep company with my Brahmin husband, with my body of the Brahmani, but had to be taken to him in the mountain home after my death?" The goddess answered this way, "No, no, O excellent lady, that I have no power to do anything. Everything happens according to the desire of the living being. Know me only as the presiding divinity of wisdom, and I reveal everything according to my knowledge of it. It is by virtue of the intellectual powers exhibited in every being that it attains its particular end. A living being has a certain development of mental powers and state when he desires an object. He attains that object according to the same development of mental powers and state. You had attained the powers of your understanding by your devotion to my service. You have always desired from me that you be liberated from that. Accordingly, I have awakened your understanding in that way, whereby you have been able to arrive at your present state of purity. So it is very clear here that God is helpless unless we desire for something and attain the uh, what we can say qualification for that. Whatever we are desiring, we need to qualify for that. Only then the God will give it to us. I have awakened your understanding in that way, whereby you have been able to arrive at your present state of purity. It was because of your constant desire for liberation that you have gained the same state by enlargement of your consciousness. Whoever exerts his body powers according to the dictates of his understanding is sure to succeed in gaining his objects sooner or later. Without cultivation of the intellect, performance of austerities, and adoration of gods are as vain as to expect fruit to fall from the sky. Without cultivation of the intellect and exertion of manly powers, there is no way to success. Therefore, if you do, you may choose for yourself. Truly, the state of one's mind leads his internal soul to that state upon which it thinks, and to that prosperity which it attempts to obtain. Now, distinguish between what is desirable or disagreeable for you, and choose that which is holy and perfect, and you will certainly arrive at it. With this chapter 45 ends, and in the chapter 46 again we will go back to the war, where there is a counter-attack by Viduratha. Ramji said, "Tell me what Viduratha did after he got angry and left the ladies and the goddess, having said what he did, and went out from the camp." Vasishtha said, Viduratha, accompanied by a large group of his companions, left his camp like the bright moon, beset by a host of stars. He was in armor and girt by laces and girdles, dressed in his military clothing. He went forth amidst the loud war cry of sorrow to the vanquished, like God Indra going to battle. He gave orders to the soldiers and was informed of the battle array. Having given directions to his captains, he mounted his chariot. It was adorned with equipment resembling the pinnacles of mountains and beset by 5 flags fringed with strings of pearls and gems, resembling a celestial star, a celestial car. The iron hoops of its wheels flashed with their golden packs, and the long and beautiful shaft of the car rang with the tinkling of pearls which were suspended to it. It was drawn by long-necked, swift and slender horses of the best breed and auspicious marks. Their swiftness and bearing made them seem like they were flying in the air, pulling a heavenly car with same body. Impatient of the wind's swiftness, they spurred them with their back heels and left them behind, and sped the forepart of their bodies as if to devour the air, impeding their course. The car was drawn by 8 war horses with their manes hanging down their necks like fans and white spots or circles resembling the disk of moon on their forehead, and filling the 8 sides around with their horse neighing. At this time there rose a loud noise of the elephants, resounding like drums from the hollows of the distant hills. Angry soldiers raised a loud clamor, and the tinkling of their belted trinklets and flashing of their weapons rang afar in the open air. The crackling of bows and the whizzing of arrows, joined with the jangle of armor, clashed against one another, raised a confused hubbub all around. Seen and heard on all sides were the sparks of blazing fires, champions challenging each other, painful shrieks of the wounded, and the piteous cry of captives. The mingled sounds of thickening in the air and filled its cavity and sides like with solid stone, as if one could clutch the noise in the hands. Clouds of dust flew so fast and thick into the air that they seemed to be the earth's crust rising upward to block the path of the sun in the sky. The great city was hidden in the dark womb of the spreading dust, just like an ignorant state of man is covered in darkness by the rising passion of youth. Burning lights became as dim as the fading stars of heaven by daylight, and the darkness of night became as thick as the devils of darkness gather their strength at night. The two Leelas saw the great battle from the tent with the minister's virgin daughter. By favor of the goddess, they had their eyes enlightened with farsightedness. Now there was an end to the flashing and clashing of the hostile arms in the city, just like the flash and crash of undersea fires are put to an end by the all-submerging floods of the universal deluge. Viduratha collected his forces and, without considering the army's superiority, pressed himself forward into them as the great Mount Meru rushed into the waters of the great deluge. Now the twanging of the bowstrings emitted a clattering sound, and the enemy forces advanced in battle array like bodies of clouds with rainbows amidst them. Many kinds of missiles flew like falcons in the air. Black steel waved with a dark glare onto the massacres they made. Flashings of swords striking against each another flashed with living flames of fire, and showers of arrows whistled like hissing rainfalls in the air. Two-edged saws reveals the bodies of the warriors, and the flinging weapons hurtled in the air, clashing and crashing each other. The darkness of the night was put to flight by the blaze of the weapons. The entire army was pierced by arrows sticking like hairs on their bodies. Headless trunks moved about like players in a horrid, solemn ritual of the god of death. Furies fled about at the violence of the war, like raving girls at drunken revelries. Elephants fighting with their tusks sent a clattering noise into the air. Stones flung from the slings flew like a flowing stream in the sky. Bodies of men were falling dead on the ground, like the dried leaves of forest blown away by wind. Streams of blood were running in the field of battle, as if the heights of war were pouring down the floods of death below. The dust of the earth was set down by the floods of blood, and the darkness was dispelled by the blaze of weapons. All clamor ceased in intense fighting, and the fear for life was lost under the stern resolution of death. The fighting was stern, without a cry or noise, like the pouring of rain in a breezeless sky. The glitter of swords in the darkened air was like the flashes of fogged lightning in murky clouds. Darts were flying about with a hissing noise. Crowbars hit one another with a harsh sound. Large weapons struck each another with a jarring noise. The dreadful war raged direfully in the dim darkness of the night. This is continuing, and with this chapter 46 also ends. Now we can take chapter 47, in which Saraswati ji is explaining why Sindhu will win. The encounter of Sindhu and Viduratha. Vasishtha said, as the war was waging furiously between the two armies, the two Leelas addressed the goddess of knowledge and said, tell us, O goddess, what unknown cause keeps our husband from gaining victory in this war, in spite of your good grace to him and his repelling enemy elephants in the fighting. Saraswati replied, no, daughters, but I was asked by Viduratha's enemy to give him victory in battle, which your husband never craved of me. He lives and enjoys his life as it was desired by him, while his antagonist gained the conquest according to his aim and object. Knowledge is contained in the consciousness of every living being and rewards everyone according to the desire to which it is directed. My nature, like that of all other things, is an unchangeable as the heat of fire. So the nature of Viduratha's knowledge of truth and his desire for liberation lead him to the like result. The intelligent Leela will also be liberated with him, but not the unintelligent one, who, by her nature, is still unprepared for that highest state of bliss. Viduratha's enemy, the king of Sindhu, has long worshipped me for his victory in the war. Therefore, the bodies of Viduratha and his wife must fall into his hands. O girl, you will also have liberation like hers in course of time. But before that, this enemy of yours, the king of Sindhu, will reign victorious in this earth. Vasishtha said, as the goddess was speaking in this manner, the sun appeared on his rising hill to behold the wonderful sight of the forces fighting. The thick mist of night disappeared like the enemy Sindhu, hosts and left Viduratha's forces to glitter like stars at the approach of night. hills and dales, and the land and water gradually appeared to sight, and the world seemed to reappear to view from amidst the dark ocean of the deluge. The bright rays of the rising sun radiated on all sides like streams of liquid gold and made the hills appear as they did the bodies of warriors besmeared with blood. The sky seemed like an immense field of battle, stretching over by the radiant rays of the sun that made the warriors' shining arms shake in a snake-like manner. The helmets on their heads raised their lotus-like tops, and the rings about their ears blazed with their jeweled layer. The pointed weapons were as fixed as the snorts of unicorns, and the flying darts fled about like butterflies in the air. Bloody field presented a picture of a ruddy dawn and dusk, and the dead bodies on the ground represented the figures of motionless things in their yoga. Necklaces hung on their necks like snakes, and armor covered their bodies like the skins of serpents. Flags were flying like crests of vines on high, and the legs of warriors stood like pillars in the field. Their long arms were like tree branches, and the arrows formed a brush of leaves. The flash of weapons spread like a green meadow all around, while their blades blazed with the luster of the long-leaved heather flowers. The long lines of weapons formed like rows of bamboo and bramble bushes. Their mutual clashing emitted sparks of fire like clusters of the red azure flowers. Bands of spiritual masters were flying with their leaders away in the air to avoid the weapons that were blazing with the radiance of the rising sun, forming, as it were, a city of gold on high. The sky re-echoed to the flashing of darts and discuses, of swords and spears, and of mallets and clubs in the field, and the ground overflowed with the streams of blood, wearing away the bodies of slain. The land was strewn with crowbars, lances, and spears, and with tridents and stones on all sides. Headless bodies were falling hideously, pierced by poles and pikes and other instruments of death. Above the ghosts and demons of death were making horrible noise, and below the shining chariots of Sindhu and Viduratha moved with a loud rumbling. They looked like the two luminaries of the sun and moon in heaven, and they were equipped with various weapons of discs and rods, of crowbars and spears, and other missiles besides. Each was surrounded by thousands of soldiers who shouted loudly as their king turned towards them. Crushed under heavy discs, many fell dead and wounded with their loud cries. Big elephants were floating lightly on the currents of blood. Hairs on the heads of dead bodies floated like weeds in the stream of blood. And floating discuses glided like the disk of the moon, reflected in the purple streamlet. The air of the battlefield was filled with the confused noise of the jingling of jeweled ornaments, the tinkling bells of war carriages, and the flapping of flags in the wind. Numbers of valiant as well as dastardly soldiers followed their respective kings, some bleeding under the spears of Kuntas, and others pierced by the arrows of archers. Then the two kings turned their chariots in circling rings amidst phalanxes armed with all sorts of destructive weapons, each confronted the other with his arms, and having met one another face to face, coming showering forth his arrows with the clattering sound of hailstones. They both threatened one another with the roaring of loud surges and clouds. In their rage, the two lions among men fired their arrows at each other. They flung their missiles in the air in the form of stones and masks, and some faced like swords, and others headed as mallets. Some were sharp edged discs, and some curved as battle axes. Some were pointed like pikes and spears, and others had forms like bars and bows. Some were shaped like tridents, and others as bulky as blocks of stone. These missiles were falling as quickly and as fast as rocks hurled down from high by gusts of blasting hurricanes. The meeting of the two warring powers was as the confluence of the Indus and the sea, with tremendous roaring, collision, and clashing. With this chapter 47 also ends, and I will rest my reading session here. And in the next session, we will take chapter 48, in which the weapons of supernatural powers will be discussed. And by Lord Ram's wish and grace, we will again meet in the next session. Until then,